Good morning, evening, afternoon, middle of the day, middle of the night, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. I'm Alex. This is the Lost Souls Podcast, and today I'm going to be talking about something that I didn't plan on talking about until today, but that's male loneliness. And I know some of you who might be listening to this, that looks weird. Some of you who might be listening to this think that maybe this is a made up thing, right? That guys are being melodramatic and that there is some kind of like we're being lazy or there's something deeper that is like a personal problem for us to deal with. And I say that as fully accepting myself as part of that problem, right? I mean, I, it takes lives. Like, do people realize this? What in the world is happening? It takes lives, right? The numbers of young men who are killing themselves. Why do people kill themselves? Because they don't feel connected enough to stay, right? Life seems so shitty that they don't see a point in continuing to live. We assume that it has to be an irrational decision to do something like this. Either I really need to be making this or I really don't. I don't really understand what's going on, but I think I got a sense of what's going on. And the sense is that I don't know what's going on. See, I'll admit it, right? I don't know everything. I know I have what I think I know now, and that can change later depending on what I find out and what I experience, and that's how you change opinions. That's how you shape yourself. I'm not the same person I was 3 or 4 years ago, and if you really want to see proof of that, I mean, look up the podcast I did on this years ago, because I think it's just called Loneliness, right? There's a narrative around this, and I just think that it's a way for communities and society to ignore a problem that is in part structural. I'm not saying that there is nothing that men can do to fix this or help this matter, but it's not just them working alone is not going to be enough to fix it. If you only address the symptoms, right? Because the symptom is the lonely men who are depressed and killing themselves. That is the symptom, right? And if you only address the symptoms, the cause of this happening is never going to actually move, right? And you're just funneling young men down this rabbit hole, and it's not going to end pretty, right? What is the world going to do when there aren't young men in the world to actually do things? Like I'd rather chase my dreams. Thank you very much. My dream is not to work on is not to be a plumber. And neither is it anybody. It's not anybody's dream to be a plumber. And I guess young men are saying, I ain't going to be forced into that for bullshit payoff. That's just, on some level. I'm just trying to offer a perspective here because I think that a lot of people don't look at I think they look at it from the other perspective and don't actually look at it from the perspective of the male experiencing the problem, right? You tell men how they're supposed to feel about it. You tell men what's going on instead of listening to what they have to say on the matter. And it's been done so long that men don't even think that speaking up is something they can do anymore, right? Because if we mention the things that we feel, we're told we're wrong. And when you hear that enough times, of course you shut the fuck up. You're speaking to a brick wall. Yeah, I'm speaking to a laptop, which is slightly better than a brick wall, but only marginally, right? Because I don't know what else to do. I don't know what else to do because I don't know how else to convince people to see something a little bit differently and actually take a nuanced opinion. The issue, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but last time I checked, it's around 20 to 30%. I think it depends on whether you look at males or females, but I think I say male loneliness epidemic because I think it affects males more so than females. However, it also affects females, which points to the fact that it's not just a personal problem. It's not just a problem with men. It's a problem, a fifth. That's a fifth, roughly a fifth of young people, right, are experiencing this. If a fifth of everybody got a disease, we would probably call that a fucking pandemic. You know what I'm saying? Like if every 1 in 5 people had cancer, we'd call cancer a serious problem. But if it's depression or it's loneliness, then we're like, well, it's not that big of a deal because we don't care about people's emotions anymore, right? Emotions are secondary to, money and productivity, which is the entire problem because we don't put people first anymore, right? Even though people are the center of everything, right? People are the basis of our society, and yet it's not the center of what we focus on, and that's half the part of the problem. I'm not sure it's half, right? And so I think there are layers here, and I think it's a complex problem that needs to be addressed in tow, or as so. Is it a coincidence? Because I haven't looked again. I'm not here to pull numbers off the internet and be like, I have looked at all these studies and this is the conclusion I've come to. I've perused them, but I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. But I think that estimations put about a fifth of the population is neurodivergent. I wonder. I just wonder if there's any correlation between neurodivergence and the loneliness that we see in the world today. I know, a crazy idea. And if so, then perhaps a solution to help this problem is simply to recognize that, right? Because it changes the discussion from something that people personally have to fix about everything, right? Because right now the narrative is it's the man's fault. It's the person who's lonely's fault, right? We're lonely because it's our problem, because we did it to ourselves, right? And I'm not saying on some level that doesn't happen, but when people seek out loneliness as such, they do so because they were taught either explicitly or implicitly it's what they needed to do, right? People don't just come out of the gate saying, I don't want connection with anybody. You know what I'm saying? People are wired for connection. We're supposed to lean into it. And if people stop seeking it, there's a reason they stop seeking it. See, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. And I get that people don't want to take responsibility for this. And like, why should I take responsibility for the man down the street who's about to kill himself? I'm not saying do that, but what I'm saying is it needs to be addressed at more than just the personal level. But we want to make everything a personal problem, especially in America, without actually considering, well, maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe part of the problem is we don't look at people in terms of groups and waves and how they are affected over long periods of time, or how they're affected as a whole group, a whole sect, because we're too busy looking at the smallest little snapshots of what's happening in case studies. And, well, with these men, it's this problem, or with that men, it's this problem, right? I mean, you blame stuff like blame porn or blame the internet and blame social media, and I'm not saying those don't play into it, but I'm saying those alone are never going to solve the problem. And by the time anybody realizes it, it's going to be too late, right? It's going to be too late. But what if, and no studies on this, what if it's less about males who are choosing to be lonely out of, I don't know, bitterness for the world, which comes from somewhere. Again, it all comes from somewhere. People, these things don't come out of nowhere. These don't just happen because I snap my fingers. I can't just and if I could snap my fingers and make 20% of the population not lonely anymore, I'd do that too. But I can't do that either. It's maybe, just maybe, it's about ableism or something. I want to say ableism, but that's a term that I don't think really gets at what's going on here. But what if that 20% has been excluded socially, almost intentionally, or maybe not intentionally, but intentionally by a collective or something along those lines, excluded out from the norm and the social circles which exist that make society function, and then they're pushed to the outside and expected to still function within the social framework that everybody else does. Maybe it's more about like neurotypicals versus neurodivergence. And I am tempted to use neurotypical as a slur. I really am, because I don't get how people function like that. It just does not make any sense to me. Although I guess other people don't understand how I function the way I do, or in the ways that I think. It's a difference of perspectives, and sometimes you need to accept the plurality of perspectives to actually see the full picture of the human experience. Because if a fifth of people are neurodivergent, then it's not some one-off thing, and if it affects a fifth of people, you can't hardly say it's a disability, right? You really can't. You can't hardly say that it's a problem. You can't hardly say that it's just, well, it's blah, blah, blah. It's serious, and these are people who exist in the world, a large percentage of population, and people are going to get pissed at me for the analogy I'm about to make, but only 1 or 2% of the population, something like that, is transgender, and yet we want to tout them up as like, fucking, we got to fight for them. Well, how about we fight for the neurodivergents first, because most of them are also probably neurodivergent. Why are we zeroing in on this small population? Oh, because they're the victim of hate crimes? Well, it appears to me that neurodivergents are the victims of social exclusion to the level to where people are fucking killing themselves. And I feel like transgender people should be able to get along with that. I feel like we're fighting the same fucking battle, and yet it doesn't actually go anywhere, And That's what gets me sometimes, you know. And yes, I go back to the trans arguments because I think it's a good example at how a small percentage of the population has become louder than the rest, right? And I think sometimes the best way to actually move forward is to have a collective. But right now, it's the idea that the collective needs to rally behind the LGBTQ+, right? How about the collective needs to rally around brains which don't work like everybody else's, which probably includes all of the LGBTQ+, and then some, right? Maybe that's what we need to do. But the issue is that, especially with autistic or neurodivergent males, right, they tend to have ideas and beliefs which don't actually get along that well with organized groups and social groups, right? Why? Because they, especially in the case now, because when you exclude people, implicitly or explicitly, I'm not saying people went out of their way to exclude people, but do you invite people to parties that you don't think belong at the parties? Do you invite people to social gatherings that you don't want at the social gatherings? And what determines whether or not you want people at social events? Oh, well, how well they mix with the group. And if neurodivergent people really don't mix well with groups, then you're not inviting them. And it may not be something that you consciously are aware of, but it's still something that happens. And honest to God, if you went through and you asked neurodivergent people this question, they would probably unanimously say it happens. But because you asked neurotypicals the question, they say, well, no, I think it's something else. Because you are the motherfuckers who are blind to it. Okay? Okay? I don't mean to get on this because I'm not, I mean, I have a diagnosed disorder which would make me considered to be neurodivergent because my brain literally works in a different way, and that's maybe only one form of neurodivergence. I mean, I probably have vastly different beliefs, but you know, and I think if this is one layer to it, that's one layer to it. The second layer, right? And this is something I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm just going to say it, and people can get pissed off at me if they want to. But I think part of the issue is also women's perception of men. And you're like, oh my God, you're going into this bullshit, right? No, really, just listen to me for a second, okay? I think there is this narrative, right? Because how do people determine mates? How do people determine people they'll be in a relationship with? What is the decision-making process, especially for women? Well, women tend to defer to the social groups they're in to help make decisions. That's why the big narrative now is, well, you need to get into some hobbies to find women. Why? Because you have to get the approval of a social group to date. Well, that's an issue when you the type of person you are just does not get along with social groups. Isn't it? And so, oh my gosh, these men aren't dating or have relationships because the women in the social groups don't think these men are safe, right? And I'm not saying that men are inherently safe all the time, but there are plenty of fucking men that these women go out with who are awful people. And then they'll go as far as to say it later. Now, I'm not saying they pick the bad guys. They don't pick the bad guys. They pick the people who on the surface look great. They pick the people who get along with the groups. They pick the people who fit into society better. The issue is that society is more biased toward men who seize power and are malicious with their intent. Right? The social groups reward not fairness, equality, and the ideas that we have about being good. Social groups reward backstabbing. They reward putting other people down. Right? And those are the men who get seen as the available and acceptable men. Right? And somehow the rest of the men have been made out to be the red flags and the problems. Now, am I saying that every way they interact is great? Am I saying every time that I've ever interacted with somebody it's been in the best way possible that didn't cause any issues whatsoever? Absolutely not. But I would also say that everybody has those issues, that there's always a point in everybody's dating social lives where they have problems that they go through. Nobody's perfect to begin with. The issue being, apparently people think people need to exist on a timeline. So if you don't learn, if you've never had the experience of being excluded, because remember what I said, these people by and large get excluded earlier. They have less access to social events, which means they socialize less, which means their social growth is slowed because of this. They call it developmental problems, but at the same time, you can't exactly develop if you're not given the opportunities to, right? This is another part of the problem. Right? If you're not given access and opportunity, how in the world are you supposed to grow through these, right? You can't learn until you go through them. And if you can't go through them, then how are you supposed to learn? Oh, well, you need to work on yourself first. Well, I could work on myself for the rest of my life, and that doesn't mean anything else is going to change. Right? It doesn't. It just doesn't. I wish it did. I wish that was the case, but it's not. The issue being is maybe some of these guys that girls think are awful, that girls think, oh, well, we can't go there because they're not social enough, or my group hasn't agreed with them enough, or maybe they're husband material, not boyfriend material. Well, you don't get to have husbands before boyfriends. You don't. And if the people that, I don't know. I don't fully know the thought process. I'm also speculating here, and maybe I'm completely wrong. But this is what it looks like from my perspective. And if this is not how things work, I guess enlighten me on it, and maybe we'll come to some understanding. But I don't think that's going to happen, because I think what's going to happen is my perspective is going to get shut and shoved into the fucking ground, while your perspective is touted as correct. And maybe that's not how perspectives work. Maybe it's not. Right? And maybe I'm biased because I don't think I'm that awful of an individual, and I think a lot of the people who are lonely, and I'm not even talking about dating necessarily, I mean just socially, right? Just socially, right? Because they're not even included in these spaces. You've got to have some kind of social capital, social clout. You already got to have friends to do this stuff, and then you got to enter in through some weird ass fucking channel that comes through you by point of, usually it's through some form of fucking submission or some form of benefit to other people, and then at that point you're not even engaged in a real social relationship. You're engaged in a transactory kind of relationship to where I only exist so much as I can give to the community, even if they're not giving anything back to me necessarily except what they call belonging, right? And this is a true probably anywhere, right? You got to buy your way in to begin with, and it's like, well, maybe the issue is that exactly. Maybe the issue is that exactly. Nobody sees an issue structurally and it needs to change it, right? I don't know. Some people probably think I'm talking out my ass right now, but some people are probably like, oh, you're actually saying the things that need to be said. Like, this is the perspective, and we're all too scared to say it because we're afraid of being lambasted by people who think otherwise. And it's like, well, my perspective is valid too, your perspective is valid too, and maybe if we both understand the other's perspective, we might actually come to some conclusion or consensus in the middle, which would be better for everybody involved. Maybe that's how understanding happens. Maybe that's how conversations happen. But as it stands now, men are too afraid to even speak up. And that's the other half of the problem, is men have been made to be scared to even approach women. I mean, socially dating, right? And I know I'm talking about dating. I'm jumping around between dating and social relationships like friendships, and those are two different things, but they're related, as in they're both under the social umbrella, right? And so what is also taught to men nowadays is that, well, what men, and keep in mind that we're probably talking about neurodivergent men, right? Men who don't have brains and thought processes that work like the normie's brain, whatever. I mean, I like normies better because it's more of a slur, right? Because the neurodivergent people get talked down on all the time, get looked down on all the time for the ways that they don't fit in with the rest of the people or act independently of other people. So why in the world would I accept that without actually turning the slur back on the normies who act like everybody else, who act like sheep? Why would I? Y'all act like fucking sheep. Just going along with whoever is told is in charge without actually questioning whether or not maybe this is a good thing, maybe this isn't right. I mean, you don't even question it. You just go along with it. And yes, I get that it offloads mental pressure and you don't have to process as much like I do, but at the same time, it's like I'm not just going to sit and think my way and agree my way into being a fucking being shit on all the time. Why would I do that? Why would I support a system which consistently and regularly decides that I'm the fucking butt of every joke? And then I say it about me, but this is true probably universally for most neurodivergent men, is why would I knowingly and willingly put myself in social situations for the sake of belonging, which treat me like a lower class citizen, which treat me like a lower class friend, which treat me like I am below everybody else, right? Because here's what happens is when that happens is that people have a way to retreat from that and not feel that way, and it's called social isolation. Right? Because the isolation ends up being more beneficial to these people than having their ego and their self-esteem continually degraded by people who don't even bother to examine themselves for what problems they may have, because it's thrown off on these other men that they're the problem. They need to work on themselves, but the rest of these people aren't working on themselves when they're probably just as bad as anybody else. And none of us get through this world without trauma. None of us get through this world without struggle. And none of us get through this world without having our own problems, except the problems get isolated and loaded onto a smaller percentage of the population because you can scapegoat them. Does this sound familiar? You know? Oh, it's them versus us, and they're the problem. It's almost like that's the basis of like a lot of the ways that people discriminate. It's almost like that's the basis of discrimination because you don't actually bother to look at it from the other perspective. Oh my gosh, why are you saying this stuff? It's not like you're an oppressed class. No, we're not an oppressed class. And yeah, I do just come back with what I think people would say. Maybe that's wrong, but I think it's a good way for me to move through these things. Oh my God, like these people aren't oppressed. They're just whining because they don't want to get out and socialize. No, what happens when the men get out and socialize is they remember why they don't do it. Right? You go out and you socialize and you're like, oh, this is why I don't leave my house because this bullshit is worse for my mental health than being alone. I am better to myself alone than I am in the presence of people. Why? Because people want to tell me who I am, put me into boxes I don't fit into, and expect me to be okay with it while you get degraded and eroded and pushed to the bottom. Because if I stand up for myself, now I'm just the fucking asshole. You know, if I stand up for myself, well, now I'm a problem. If I actually go after the things I want, well, that's the problem is that you're actually going after the things you want. And people, this is not the explicit, this is the implicit. Because the explicit, you can chase your dreams, you can do whatever, and you should take risks, right? But when you take risks, you're implicitly taught, hey, you shouldn't have taken that risk. That was a problem. And this is, I'm speaking kind of generally and abstractly because I think these kind of thoughts can be applied to a lot of different situations and not just like one. Like I have more than one situation I can apply it to from my life. Right? And does this mean universally? And does this mean that I don't think that with men it goes a little bit further? No, because I think what happens is you get stuck in this thought process, and then you get stuck in limiting beliefs, right? And when you go through all these limiting belief factors, right, then you grow to be in this existence because you've been in it for so long, right? And now it's like, well, now you got to break it. And it's like, well, if I try to break the cycle, a lot of men who experience this, and probably even women, have turned away from the world in terms of social matters and either turned toward religion or spirituality. And I think there's two sides. I think a lot of people seeking religion actually are seeking spirituality, but religion is a way by which people can approach and interact with the divine without necessarily having to go through the work of trying to find it yourself. Right? Or just different from me, whereas I had a very violent spiritual awakening and I had to grapple with what that meant later on, and I've walked through different beliefs, I've walked through different ways of acting and being, and you know, I mean if you want any proof as to exactly how deep I've gone into this, that's the devil on the bottom of the deck. Alright, let's see. Oh, got some cards that fell out. Oh, because that's crazy how that's actually how it happens. So you've got the Two of Cups, the World. Oh. I'll show you how they come out. I usually do a 7 card. Let's see if it's 7, 4, 5. It's actually just 6, so which means we'll take one. Well, I'll get the last one at the end. We got the Two of Pentacles, right? And I'm just going to lay these out, and hopefully somebody, I'm channeling some kind of message, if anybody actually made it this far. See, oh, I didn't show you this one. This is 5 of Pentacles in reverse. I'm not going to look up the actual meanings for all these. The Hanged Man, I know some of them I don't. And at the end of the day, it's trusting your own intuition to help you guide in these, because it's your intuition and your connection to the unconscious which lets you read them in the first place. And then we have the Lover's card, right? So the Two of Cups. Oh, I love that reading, actually. So what I'm seeing is in the past, you've entered into a relationship which was transactory, right? You poured in, maybe I'm reading myself, I don't know. Poured in, poured out, but you came to some mutual agreement which found some balance. And through this mutual agreement, you managed to open up the world to you. You managed to extend out your reach, you managed to see new perspectives, and you managed to feel like you were breaking free. This sets up the groundwork to riches, to finding riches, right? Because the Two of Pentacles kind of shows wealth and power coming in. And yes, wealth and power are essentially the same thing. And it's not exactly awful to seek power. But hey, we see this power coming in, but it comes with a warning. This is the present. The 5 of Pentacles in reverse. Oh, and 5 is a number which kind of brings structure, right? And the reverse would be the opposite of structure. Because I'm trying to explain how I'm seeing these cards as I'm reading them, because you can disagree with my interpretations, but at the end of the day, it's still what I'm saying. And so be careful that the structure you're within does not break and keep you from seeking the fortune which you should find, the power which you shall find. However, with the Hanged Man in the future, you shall find your enlightenment if you just continue on your path forward. And with the Lover's card, not only will you find your path, you will find love and connection along with it. Now, we need one more card to seal the deal, and I am not going to just pull from the bottom of the deck automatically. I'm going to see if something else comes out for me, and maybe not. Oh, let's see. Because I shuffle these usually when I get done. Because guess what? I think tarot. Ooh, okay. Hold on. I got a lot to pull out here. Which means that's from this section. We got a lot of cards. See these cards. See if I can get one to come out of these. It's probably not going to happen. So we'll just pull the top, which is the star. Right? What the star? Oh, because this attention is what's going to bring it to you. This spotlight, right? This is what I'm getting, a spotlight. This will fill your cup, right? This will bring you to the place you want to see, because the star is what binds all the cards I've drawn together. That's my intuition for it. And so in the star, just like the skies, must shine brightly. And so you've got to let your light shine to redeem all of this. And maybe this is my reading. This feels like a reading for me right now. But what do I know? Maybe you can look back at this someday and see if I'm right about it. Because I'm going to keep it in the podcast. Like 30 minutes and nobody's listening to it at this point. Probably. And, I snuck it in there. Because I do believe that things like this have some truth to them. Are they fully true? No. Are they charlatans? Sure. Are they soothsayers? Yeah. But if some people know what they're talking about, also yeah. And I like to think I'm one of them, as I feel confirmation in my spirit right now from the Holy Spirit, Sophia, as I call her, right? I think you know the Holy Spirit by different names, and I think different cultures know the Holy Spirit by different names, right? But I think the Holy Spirit is something which exists in the world for people to connect with, because it is the way that we connect to the divine. Well, most people can connect. You can find other ways to connect to the divine, but I find that to be one of the best ways, right? Biased. I think there was other stuff I want to talk about. Oh, and another thing is the men, because the men who uphold the social order inherently benefit from doing so. Oh, because if the men who realize that these people are easy to put down, easy to scapegoat, right? Even though they're committing the same problems that other people are, because look at like the fucking sex rings of the world. Do you think that the men doing these sex rings are the ones who you don't even think can properly hold fucking conversations? Because that's what you seem to believe. Or is it the case that it's a group effort on behalf of the men that you call fucking good? Because of course they're tricking people into believing that, oh, they're the good guys. And then whenever the wool gets pulled out and they're like, oh, they weren't the whole time? Oh my God, because neurodivergents are the ones obsessed with virtue and justice and equality and doing the right thing. You think these people are running fucking sex rings? But they're the bad guys. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. Seriously, I want somebody in the comment section to prove me my past wrong. Make arguments, make appeals that change my opinion on the matter. I might listen to you. If there's good enough reasoning, if it makes sense. Or maybe I'll just update my perspective and how I view it because you also viewed it. But here's what's not going to happen, like I know. You're not going to accept a separate perspective. You're not going to even acknowledge it. You're going to spew out your perspective without somebody else even attempting to, without even attempting to see it from another perspective. Which, even if you don't, it's still important that you try. All right, I don't think I have anything else. I think I went through the things that I wanted to go through about it, and I'm sure I've left things out, because this doesn't even touch on like veteran suicide rates, which is another thing that the devil's still on the bottom of the deck. The devil's not what you think. It kind of is. It's a sign of sin and temptation. It is a sign of worldly pleasures, right? It's because the devil exists within our minds. The devil is a part of the collective unconscious, which is that the darkness which is to be overcome, which people say is to be overcome, but it depends on what your goal is. I would say that the goal of the darkness of the devil is to be integrated, because without the strength of the devil, because even you cannot deny the strength there, without integrating that with the light, right? You hold no power. It's through integrating the devil, acknowledging the devil, accepting the devil and the temptations, and not just either A, giving way, or B, strongly denying them, but trying to understand them, do you actually come to any kind of strength or power. And again, at this point, nobody's listening, and maybe nobody will pay attention until way down the road, and it doesn't matter anymore. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I look crazy doing stuff like this. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you got this far and you're like, man, I just kept watching, and then you actually said something that spoke really true to me in that reading, right? And it's like, I'm glad. I think it was probably just a reading for myself, but hey, maybe it wasn't. Maybe I actually touched on a collective with that. It's been like 35 minutes. Even after I edit this down, it's still going to be super long. Super long. I've been Alex. I've probably forgotten a lot of stuff I want to talk about, but I just go until I feel like I've went long enough. This has been the Lost Soul Podcast. Maybe be kind to somebody and try to understand their perspective between now and the next time you ever see me, if you ever see me again. And